The wig was already in his hand. That detail hit the crowd first, before the gasps, before the phones came out, before anyone fully understood what they were seeing. A man standing in the middle of North Park Center in Dallas, holding a jet black wig like it was something he owned. Like ripping it off a woman's head in public was nothing. Like she was nothing. Zariah Coleman didn't move. She stood exactly where she'd been yanked backward, one heel slightly off balance, her handbag still gripped in both hands. The cream coat. The emerald dress. Every carefully chosen piece of her still intact, except the one thing she'd built her armor around. Her head was exposed now. The burned scars caught the light. Uneven patches of skin where hair would never grow back. A map of a night she had survived and spent 2 years trying to bury. And now it was on display, under chandeliers, on polished marble floors, surrounded by strangers with phones already rising. The air from the mall's ventilation hit her scalp like ice water. She didn't reach for the wig. Not one finger moved toward it. A woman near a handbag display pressed her hand over her mouth. A teenage boy stopped mid-step and stared. Somewhere behind Zariah, a child asked a question that a parent immediately hushed. The entire foot of that corridor contracted, not loudly, but completely, the way a room goes quiet when something happens that everyone knows is wrong but no one is prepared to stop. Darnell Briggs held it higher. He was smiling. Not the kind of smile that meant joy, the kind that meant control. Broad shoulders, designer jacket, an expensive watch catching the light just enough to announce itself. He looked like success. He looked like someone you'd let speak first at a dinner party. He looked like absolutely nothing dangerous at all. That was always the cruelest part. "Let them see you," he said. His voice was low, not a shout, but engineered to carry. Engineered to land. 2 years of silence, 2 years of distance, a restraining order filed and renewed, and here he stood, as comfortable as if none of that existed. As if her fear was a door he still had a key to. Zariah's jaw tightened. Her fingers pressed harder into the leather of her bag. Inside her chest, something old and terrible woke up, the thing that used to make her go small, go quiet, stop existing in whatever room he was in. The reflex. The survival mechanism that had kept her breathing through years of what no one saw behind closed doors. It rose up fast. And then, it stopped. Something in her refused. Not loudly. Not with words. But in the way her spine stayed straight. In the way her eyes didn't drop to the floor. In the way she looked directly at him and didn't give him the collapse he came for. Have you ever been humiliated in public, and the only weapon you had left was your silence? Because that's where Zariah was standing. In the full exposure of a crowded mall, with her worst secret pressed under fluorescent light, choosing, in real time, whether to break or hold. She held. Darnell's smile flickered. Just once. Barely. But it did. Before we proceed, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. I want to know exactly how far this story is already traveling. The crowd didn't disperse. It thickened. Human nature doesn't look away from pain, it gravitates toward it, quietly, with its camera ready. Zariah could feel every eye. Could feel the weight of being seen in the one way she had spent years making sure she never would be. But she stayed. Still. Upright. Present. Up on the mezzanine level above the atrium, past the glass railing and the quiet buzz of a private lounge that wasn't listed on the mall directory, a man set down his glass. Slowly. He hadn't been loud before that moment. Hadn't moved. Hadn't given any visible signal to the 2 men seated nearby who immediately straightened the second he did. No one on the floor below would have noticed him, he'd made sure of that. Dark suit, still posture, the kind of face that revealed absolutely nothing unless he allowed it to. But his eyes had not left her. Not since the moment it happened. A member of the lounge staff glanced in his direction, then looked away just as fast, the way people do when they realize they've accidentally made eye contact with something they don't fully understand. He didn't look at the wig. He looked at her. At the way she was standing. At what it cost her to stand that way. Something passed across his expression, too fast, too controlled to name. But it was there. And the two men flanking him felt it before they saw it, because they were already moving, repositioning, quietly, the way trained men do when the temperature of a room changes without warning. Moments like this happen fast. Most people miss the warning signs. By the time they understand what's happening, the pieces are already in motion. He stood. And that was the moment the entire situation stopped belonging to Darnell. He didn't use the elevator. He took the stairs, the ones behind the lounge that weren't marked on any public directory, the ones the mall's private security used when they needed to move without being seen. And the two men who followed him didn't ask why. They never asked why. They simply fell into formation 3 steps behind, hands loose at their sides, eyes already scanning the floor below before their feet hit the bottom step. The crowd around Darnell and Zariah had thickened into a half-circle. Maybe 30 people. Maybe more. The kind of crowd that forms when something wrong is happening and no one wants to be the one to stop it, but everyone wants to be close enough to say they were there. Darnell still held the wig. He was talking now. Not loudly, performing. The way men like him always performed when they had an audience. Turning his humiliation of her into entertainment. Into proof of something. Zariah stood 2 feet away from him, her chin level, her expression carved from stone, her fingers still locked around her bag. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. And that restraint, that absolute refusal to give him what he wanted, was costing her more than anyone in that crowd could see. Her eyes swept the space once. Quickly. The way a person does when they're calculating exits, not sightseeing. There was a security guard near the corner entrance, young, maybe 23, one hand resting on his radio. He was looking directly at the scene. He had not moved a single step toward it. That told her everything. Nobody was coming. Then something shifted. Not a sound. Not a movement she could pinpoint. Just a change in the air. The way a room feels different when a door opens somewhere you can't see. Zariah felt it before she understood it. A stillness rolling through the crowd from the outside in, like a current moving against the direction of everything else. A woman near the edge of the half-circle stepped back without looking at Darnell. Her eyes were fixed on something behind Zariah. A man in a gray blazer, mid-40s, the kind of guy who didn't look rattled easily, turned his head and then went completely quiet. Not curious quiet. Careful quiet. The security guard near the entrance took his hand off his radio. And put it in his pocket. Zariah's neck tightened. She didn't turn around yet. Darnell didn't notice any of it. He was still talking, something about how she always needed to be reminded of her place, something designed to cut, designed to land in front of witnesses. His grip on the wig tightened as his voice rose just slightly, feeding off the silence of the crowd the way fire feeds off oxygen. His confidence hadn't wavered. But his grip had. Zariah noticed that. She noticed the exact moment his fingers closed harder around the wig, not because he was sure of himself, but because something at the edge of his awareness had snagged. Something he hadn't identified yet. Something that made his body react before his mind caught up. The crowd parted. Not all at once. Gradually. Naturally. The way water moves around a stone, not because anyone told it to, but because the stone simply was. Kang Dae-hyun walked through the space they made without acknowledging it. He wasn't tall in the way that announced itself. He wasn't broad or physically imposing in any obvious sense. He was lean, composed, dressed in a dark suit that sat on him the way expensive things sit on people who don't need to prove anything. His hands were at his sides. His pace was even. His face gave away nothing, not curiosity, not anger, not purpose. But the two men flanking him at a measured distance told a different story. He stopped 8 feet from Darnell. Just stopped. Like he had chosen that exact coordinate and saw no reason to adjust it. His eyes moved to Zariah first. 1 full second. Taking in the exposed scalp, the scars, the posture that was holding itself together by sheer will. Then his gaze shifted to Darnell. And stayed there. He didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. No one in that corridor interrupted him. No one ever did, though most of them couldn't have explained why. It was the kind of presence that didn't ask for a room. It simply occupied one. Zariah didn't know why, but she stopped breathing. What would you do if a complete stranger stepped into the worst moment of your life, and said nothing, but changed everything? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Darnell finally turned. His eyes landed on Daehyun and moved across him the way they moved across anything he'd already decided didn't matter. A quick read. A dismissal. The smile came back, slower this time, but it came. Help you with something? Darnell said. Daehyun looked at him the way a man looks at a clock that's already run out of time. Yes, he said. One word. Quiet enough that the people 3 feet away had to lean in to catch it. No accent sharpened it. No emotion colored it. Just one word, landing with the weight of everything it didn't say. Give it back. Darnell blinked. Then he laughed, short, reflexive, the kind of laugh that fills space when a person doesn't know what else to do with their hands. Excuse me, he said. You don't know who you're talking to. Daehyun didn't answer that. He simply looked at Darnell the way a man looks at a choice, not a person. And when he spoke again, his voice dropped 1 register lower, calm as a flatline. Walk away, he said. Or regret staying. Darnell laughed again. Louder this time, constructed for the crowd, built for performance. He turned his head slightly, making sure the people watching could see that he wasn't intimidated. That this was funny to him. That whoever this man was, he wasn't a factor. Walk away, Darnell repeated, mocking the cadence. Man, do you have any idea? I'm not asking twice. That stopped it. Not the volume, Daehyun's voice hadn't risen at all. But something in the delivery cut straight through Darnell's performance like a blade through paper. Clean. No effort. No anger behind it. Just certainty. Darnell's smile held, but something behind his eyes recalculated. The crowd had gone from spectators to witnesses. There was a difference. Spectators watched for entertainment. Witnesses understood they were seeing something that mattered. The energy shifted, leaning in, holding still, the way people do when a situation stops being someone else's problem and starts being something they'll remember. Zariah stood between them. Not physically, she had taken 1 small step to the side, instinctively, the way prey moves when 2 larger forces converge. Her eyes moved from Darnell to the stranger and back again, reading both of them the way a woman who had survived years of unpredictable violence learned to read rooms. She wanted this to stop. She also couldn't look away. Because something about the way this stranger stood there, still, unreadable, completely unbothered, was doing something to the fear she'd been carrying since Darnell's voice first hit her ears. Not erasing it. But pushing it back. Making space for something else underneath. She just didn't know what to call it yet. Darnell squared his shoulders. Classic response, widen the frame, take up more space, remind everyone in the room that you're the bigger man. It worked on most people. Most rooms. Most situations. You don't know who I am, he said, voice dropping into that register he used when he wanted someone to feel the ground shift. I got lawyers that eat guys like you for sport. I got connections in this city that'll have your business license pulled by Monday morning. You really want to do this over some woman? He said the last two words like they explained everything. Like they should have been enough to end it. Dae-hyun didn't move. Didn't shift his weight. Didn't glance at his men. Didn't acknowledge the threat the way people acknowledge threats, with a flinch, a pause, a visible moment of consideration. He just looked at Darnell. And Darnell laughed, until he noticed no one else did. Not the crowd. Not the people on the edges who'd been entertained 30 seconds ago. Not even the young woman near the handbag display who had her phone raised. The laughter landed in total silence and sat there, exposed, the way a joke lands wrong at a funeral. Darnell felt it. The man didn't blink. That was the part that started to work on Darnell in ways he wasn't prepared for. People blinked. People looked away, looked around, shifted, gave you something to read. This man gave him nothing. No tell. No reaction. Just eyes that stayed fixed with the patience of someone who had already decided how this ended and was simply waiting for the other person to arrive at the same conclusion. You think I'm scared of you? Darnell said. Quieter now. Which was worse? Quiet meant he was recalibrating. No, Dae-hyun replied. I think you're confused. Confused about what? About where you are. A brief pause. And who's here? It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a threat dressed up in language. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same tone a man uses to tell you the weather. And that, the absence of performance in it, was the thing that started pulling at the edges of Darnell's composure. Because loud men understand loud men. They know the language. They know where bluster ends and real danger begins. But this man wasn't loud. And Darnell didn't have a reference for him. Zariah realized something in that moment, something cold and clarifying. This wasn't about her anymore. It had started that way. Darnell had come for her, to humiliate her, to remind her of what he believed she still was. But somewhere in the last 90 seconds, the target had shifted. She had become background. And the two men standing in this corridor were now locked into something that had its own gravity, its own momentum, completely independent of what she felt or feared. That terrified her. Not because she wanted to be the center of it. But because she understood what it meant when men like Darnell stopped performing and started calculating. He was doing it right now, she could see it in the way his jaw moved slightly, the way his eyes flicked once to the two men standing behind the stranger, the way his hand finally, loosened around the wig. Was Darnell brave, or was he simply too proud to understand the difference between courage and consequence? Think about it. Drop your answer in the comments. The wig hung at his side now. Not a trophy anymore. Dead weight. Most people mistake silence for weakness. That particular mistake has a cost. And in rooms like this one, with men like this one, that cost collected fast. Dae-hyun took one step forward. Just one. Measured. Deliberate. The distance between them closed by roughly 18 inches, close enough to be undeniable, far enough to stay legal. His hands remained at his sides. His voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. The item in your hand, he said, doesn't belong to you. Darnell stared at him. Something moved through his expression, not fear, not yet, but the first real crack in the certainty he'd walked in with. His mouth opened. Then closed. Dae-hyun took another step. And that's when Darnell finally felt it. Not the words. Not the men behind him. Not the crowd watching with their phones and their silence. Something else. Something that lived in the space between what this man said and what he didn't say. Something's wrong. The wig hit the floor. Not thrown, dropped. Darnell's fingers simply opened, and it fell, landing against the polished marble like something discarded. Like it meant nothing. Like the thing it represented meant nothing. Zariah's eyes went to it before she could stop herself. And in the half-second she looked down at it, jet black against white marble, soft waves spread wide, something cracked open inside her chest. Not loudly. The way things break when they've been held together by sheer will for too long. The slow kind. The kind that starts in your ribs and works outward. She had promised herself she would never feel small again. The memory came without warning, the way the worst ones always do. Not a full scene. Fragments. The kind that live in muscle and nerve, not in the thinking part of the brain. The smell of something burning. Her own voice, not screaming, just asking him to stop, which was somehow worse. The bathroom mirror in their house in Frisco, Texas, the one with the gold frame she'd picked out herself, reflecting back something she didn't recognize as her own face. The night Darnell had held the lighter to her hair. Not in a rage. That was the part people never understood when she tried to explain it, and she had stopped trying to explain it, eventually. It wasn't in a rage. He'd been completely calm. Almost quiet. The way he got when he wanted her to understand something. When he wanted the lesson to last. Her hair had gone first. Then, when she'd pulled away, the flame had caught the left side of her scalp. He'd driven her to the ER himself. Told them she'd knocked over a candle. Held her hand in the waiting room. She had let him. That was the part she carried the most shame about, not the scars, not the hair, not even the fear. The part where she let him hold her hand. The part where some broken piece of her was still grateful he stayed. And yet, here she was. Standing in North Park Center on a Thursday afternoon, her scalp exposed under chandelier light, 2 years of rebuilding scattered across 30 feet of corridor, a man she had a legal order of protection against holding the symbol of everything she'd fought back to become. She had worn that wig to a meeting this morning. A real one. The kind she once thought her life would never contain again, a licensing deal with a boutique wellness brand out of Scottsdale, Arizona, the result of 18 months of work she'd done entirely alone, entirely from scratch, entirely on the other side of the worst years of her life. The contract was in her bag right now. Unsigned, but close. The kind of close that felt like finally. She had worn that wig because she wasn't ready for a room full of strangers to see the scars and decide what they meant before she got a chance to speak. That was all it was. Not vanity. Survival. Dae-hyun's eyes moved from Darnell to the wig on the floor, and then, briefly, deliberately, to Zariah. He didn't look at her scars the way others did. Not with pity. Not with the particular discomfort people showed when confronted with evidence of something they'd rather not know about. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time and is still, somehow, standing. Something shifted in his expression. It was small. Contained. The kind of thing that wouldn't register unless you were already watching for it, and Zariah was watching for everything, because that was what 2 years of rebuilding from the inside out had taught her to do. Read the room. Read the face. Read the space between what people said and what they meant. What she saw in him didn't match anything she expected. She couldn't name it. Not yet. But it wasn't detachment. It wasn't the clinical calm of a man doing a stranger a favor and waiting to be thanked. It was recognition. The kind that only lives in people who have touched real loss and learned to move through the world carrying it quietly. Whatever Kang Dae-hyun's history was, and she understood instinctively that it was not simple, not clean, not anything she could map onto normal, that look was real. Which somehow made her more afraid of him, not less. Darnell hadn't noticed any of it. His attention had locked back onto Dae-hyun with the specific focus of a man who had decided that backing down wasn't an option because too many people were watching. You have no idea what you just walked into, Darnell said. His voice had changed. Lower now. The performance was gone. This was the version of him Zariah knew. The private version. The one that came out when the room got small and the audience didn't matter anymore. Would you have stayed with someone like that, or walked away before it got this far? Be honest in the comments. There's no wrong answer. Only real ones. Some wounds don't show until someone forces them into the light. And once they're exposed, the only question left is who's standing there when it happens. Dae-hyun crouched. One smooth, unhurried motion. He picked up the wig from the floor with both hands, carefully, the way you'd pick up something that mattered, and stood back up. He turned toward Zariah. Extended it to her. Not with words. Not with explanation. Just the simple, direct act of returning something to the person it belonged to. Her fingers closed around it slowly. Their hands didn't touch. But the distance between them, in that one moment, was the smallest it had been. She looked at him. He looked at her. 1 second. Maybe 2. Then he turned back to Darnell. And when he reached for him, not the wig, not the space between them, when his hand moved toward Darnell directly, with that same quiet certainty that had defined every single move he'd made since he came down those stairs. Everything changed. Darnell stepped back. He didn't decide to. His body made that choice before his pride could override it, one instinctive half-step backward, weight shifting onto his rear foot, chin lifting the way it does when something in the base of your brain registers a threat your ego hasn't processed yet. He caught himself immediately. Straightened. Looked around to see if anyone noticed. Everyone noticed. The crowd had stopped being a crowd. It had become something quieter and more attentive, 30 people holding their breath in unison, phones lowered now, because what was happening in front of them had moved past content. It was real. And real things demand your actual eyes. Dae-hyun hadn't touched him. He hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't signaled to the men behind him. Hadn't done anything that a security camera would flag or a lawyer could frame. He had simply moved, closed the distance by 2 feet, stood inside the radius of personal space that Darnell had always used as a weapon against other people, and waited. The laughter was gone. Whatever Darnell had been building, the performance, the crowd ownership, the version of this afternoon where he walked away with the last word, it was gone. Completely. The way a fire goes out when the air supply is cut. Not extinguished dramatically. Just, no longer burning. Back up, Darnell said. Dae-hyun didn't move. I said back up. Still nothing. Same posture. Same eyes. Same absolute, unhurried stillness that was somehow louder than anything Darnell had said in the last 10 minutes. Zariah watched Darnell's jaw tighten. Watched him look to the sides, an old reflex, looking for backup, for allies, for anyone who might shift the weight of the room back in his direction. Nobody moved. Darnell took another step back. Without realizing it. She saw it happen and felt something she hadn't expected, not satisfaction, not relief, but a raw, almost painful recognition. Because that step backward was the same step she had taken 1,000 times. In their kitchen. In their bedroom. In the hallway of the house in Frisco where she had learned to read his footsteps by sound so she could adjust her own behavior before he reached the door. She had spent years shrinking herself into corners. And now he was the one with his back moving toward the wall. Zariah didn't recognize the man she once feared. He looked smaller. Not physically, but the thing that had made him dangerous, that invisible mass of certainty he wore everywhere he went, was compressing in real time. The watch still gleamed. The jacket still fit. But the man inside them had shifted, and the shift was visible to everyone present. Dae-hyun leaned in, barely, just enough, and said something. Low. Private. Not for the crowd, not for Zariah, not for the cameras. Just for Darnell. 6 words. Zariah couldn't hear them. But she watched Darnell's face receive them. And the color changed. Not dramatically, a slight pull around his mouth, a tightening at the corners of his eyes. The specific expression of a person who has just understood something they cannot unhear. His hand went to his jacket pocket. Then stopped. He looked at Dae-hyun one more time, searching, the way people search a face when they're trying to determine if what they just heard was a bluff. It wasn't. Whatever Dae-hyun had said, Darnell believed it completely. Does a man like Darnell deserve mercy, or did he spend every chance he was ever given? Leave your answer below. I want to read every single one. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply reveals itself at the exact moment it's too late to do anything about it. Darnell straightened his jacket. A small, automatic gesture, the physical equivalent of saving face when there was no face left to save. His eyes moved briefly to Zariah. Something passed through them that she had never seen there before. Not remorse. Not quite. But close enough to it that it unsettled her almost as much as his cruelty ever had. He looked away first. For the first time in the 11 years she had known him, across the 3 years of marriage, across the long nightmare inside it, across the 2 years of distance and legal orders and slowly reclaiming herself, Darnell Briggs looked away first. He took a step toward the exit. Then another. The crowd made space for him the way it had made space for Dae-hyun, but differently. Not out of instinct. Out of relief. The kind that fills a room when something dangerous is finally moving toward the door. Dae-hyun watched him go. He didn't turn until Darnell had cleared the corridor entirely, disappeared through the main entrance, past the glass doors, out into the parking structure where the afternoon light was flat and gray. Only then did he move. He turned toward Zariah. And the look on his face now was different from anything he'd shown since he came down those stairs. Not closed off. Not calculating. Something quieter than that. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, without ceremony, without preamble, he said, simply. Are you all right? 3 words. The most ordinary question in the world. And somehow the most dangerous thing he had said all afternoon, because Zariah felt them land somewhere deep and unguarded, in the part of herself she had spent 2 years walling off. She opened her mouth. And that's when his phone rang. He glanced at it. 1 second. His expression closed again, completely, instantly, like a door shutting. He answered it. 2 words in Korean. A pause. Then he lowered the phone and looked at her one final time. This time, he said quietly, he'll listen. He turned to leave. Wait, Zariah said. He stopped. Didn't turn around. Just stopped. Who are you? She asked. A beat of silence. And this time, it wasn't optional. He turned around slowly. Not all the way. Just enough, a 3/4 turn, his profile catching the light from the atrium above. His expression had returned to that unreadable default, but something in his eyes hadn't fully closed back down yet. Something she'd caught in the window between the phone call and now was still there, faint but present, like an ember that hadn't decided yet whether to go out. He looked at her. And he didn't answer the question she'd asked. Instead, he said, "You had a meeting this morning." Zariah went still. Not a question. A statement. Delivered with the same flat certainty he'd used on Darnell, but pointed at her now, landing differently. More precise. More unsettling. The Scottsdale contract, he continued. Quietly. Wellness licensing. They've been waiting 6 weeks for your signature. Her bag was in her hand. The contract was inside it. And signed, as of this morning. Nobody in this mall knew that. Nobody she had spoken to today knew the full specifics, not the timeline, not the company, not the detail of 6 weeks. She hadn't posted about it. Hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Her mouth opened. Then closed. He didn't ask for her name. He already knew it. How, she started. The meeting is still on, he said. You have 40 minutes. Zariah stared at him. The wig was in her hands, she'd been holding it since he returned it, fingers pressed into the soft waves without realizing, the way you grip something when the ground shifts. Her scalp still felt cold. The crowd had thinned, people drifting away now that the confrontation was over, resuming the ordinary business of a Thursday afternoon at North Park Center as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something she didn't have language for yet. Why do you know that? She said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card. No logo. No company name. Just a number, embossed in black on white, the paper heavy and clean in a way that communicated more than a logo ever could. He held it out. She didn't take it immediately. Her eyes moved from the card to his face, reading him the way she'd learned to read every room, every person, every situation that arrived without a clear exit. He was patient. He didn't push it toward her. Didn't retract it. Just held it there, offering without insisting, which was such a foreign version of how men had operated in her life that it almost made her more suspicious, not less. She took it. The cardstock was cool between her fingers. Would you trust a man like him, knowing what you know about where he came from and what he was capable of? Think carefully before you answer. Drop it in the comments. You should go, he said. Don't let today take the meeting from you. He said it like he understood exactly what today had cost her. Not the scene itself, but what it threatened. The contract. The 18 months of work. The version of herself she had been carefully, deliberately rebuilding in the 2 years since she'd walked out of that house in Frisco with 3 bags and a restraining order and nothing else. He understood that. She didn't know how. She didn't know who he was or what the number on that card would connect her to or what his knowing her business actually meant about the edges of her world she couldn't see. But she knew he understood. She looked down at the card once more. Then she put it in her bag, adjusted the wig carefully, without rush, without shame, without performing composure for anyone watching, and straightened her coat. She looked at him one final time. Thank you, she said. He gave a single, slight nod. Then he walked away, back toward the stairs he'd come down, his men falling into formation behind him, and within 30 seconds, he was gone. No dramatic exit. No last look back. Simply, gone, the way he'd arrived, as if the mall had briefly been his and was now returned to its ordinary purpose. Zariah stood alone in the corridor. The chandelier light moved over the marble the same as it always had. A child laughed somewhere near the food court. A woman pushed a stroller past without making eye contact. The world had resumed. But Zariah's hands were trembling. Not from fear. From something harder to name. She started walking. Toward the east exit, toward the parking garage, toward her car and the drive to the meeting and the contract and the life she had fought so hard to build. Her heels clicked against the marble, steady, deliberate, the rhythm she'd arrived with. She didn't look back. But 3 things sat inside her chest the whole way to the car. The card. The weight of it in her bag. The 6 words Daehyun had said to Darnell that she couldn't hear, and the way Darnell's face had looked when he heard them. And the fact that Darnell had walked out of this mall without a word. Without a threat. Without the last look he always needed to have. Without any of the behaviors she had spent years learning to predict and survive. He hadn't just backed down. He had been afraid. Which meant Kang Dae-hyun had told him something that made Darnell Briggs, a man who had never been afraid of anything in her presence, want to disappear quickly and quietly. That should have made her feel safe. It didn't. Because Darnell was quiet. Not gone. Not finished. Just quiet. And in her experience, quiet was where things gathered before they moved. Zoraya thought surviving her past was the hardest part. She hadn't realized stepping into his world would cost even more. If this story pulled you in, if you felt something watching Zoraya stand her ground today, then you already know you can't stop here. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. Every story on this channel is built for people who understand that survival is only the beginning. New stories drop regularly, and you do not want to miss what happens next. If you're not ready to subscribe yet, that's okay, drop a comment and tell us why. Your voice matters here. And if someone in your life needs to hear a story like this today, share it. You never know who's watching and holding something heavy they haven't told anyone about yet. This wasn't over. Not even close.